Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. So I see now that we have 172 participants connected and more are getting in. So it is already 10 a.m. here in Central Europe, and I understand it's 3 p.m. there in Bangkok. So my name is Simon Padilla. I work for the Secretariat of the Standards and Trade Development Facility, the STDF. We are one of the co-organizers of this workshop. So I would like to first welcome to you all, the participants for this workshop on SPS electronic certification. And I would like to first start with an introduction, some opening remarks from the organizers.
Good afternoon or good morning from ESCAP in Bangkok. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this third webinar in the ESCAP ICC ADB webinar series on accelerating cross-border paperless trade in Asia and the Pacific. So as you may know, the first webinar was on single window interoperability. The second webinar was on blockchain for trade and for cross-border paperless trade. So recordings of those webinars are available online. But then this third webinar is going to focus on yet another exciting topic, which is electronic exchange of sanitary and phytosanitary certificates. So this is probably, for me, one of the most relevant topics in the series, because this SPS certificate is one of the documents that is being prioritized by countries when implementing cross-border paperless trade. Right? So most likely it's going to be a key focus of discussions when implementation of the framework agreement on facilitation of cross-border paperless trade in Asia and the Pacific, when the treaty implementation starts early next year. So I'm really looking forward to learning from all the experts and the participants. And I'm very pleased to see that we actually have in this webinar all the key stakeholders. So IPPC with Craig Frecock is here. We have OIE, we have the Codex Alimentarius, and we also have the Standards and Trade Development Facility. And I'd like to thank especially Melvin from STDF for being the co-organizer of this webinar today. We're going to hear from Fiji, we are going to hear from the experience from Malaysia, and also from the Netherlands. So I think it's going to be a very exciting and an interesting webinar, and I encourage all of you to listen and to participate and to learn, as I will do. So thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to this webinar. With the entry into force of the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement and also accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, governments and industry partners are actively seeking solutions to move goods across borders more quickly, more efficiently. Paperless SPS systems can improve traceability throughout supply chains, lowering food waste, cutting trade time and costs, reducing fraudulent certificates, and building trust among trading partners. Now, the STDF actively supports the increased use of electronic certification to facilitate safe trade in food and agricultural products. And together with the IPPC, we piloted a new approach towards electronic phytosanitary certification, and more than 50 developing countries are now using the ePhyto Hub, which is cutting trade costs, including, very importantly, for small and medium enterprises. We work with the OIE in analyzing and understanding the potential for electronic veterinary certification. And in the STDF, we regularly convene stakeholders in this area to exchange experiences, disseminate good practice, and identify opportunities for collaboration. So I look forward to hear today where we stand on electronic certification in the Asia Pacific region from our partners and through the case studies. Enjoy this webinar. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar series on SPS E-CERTS Accelerating Cross-Border Paperless Trade. My name is Oswald Kaler, and I'm the Managing Director of the Digital Standards Initiative at the International Chamber of Commerce. It's a privilege for us to work with ESCAP and ADB on the webinar series, and I want to commend them for the leadership that they've played in this arena over the last few years. So thank you so much. I also want to thank the attendees for opening up their time to join us today and learn from some of our panelists. I want to thank the panelists for bringing a lot of your experience and your knowledge and being willing to share that with everyone. So thank you so much. And finally, I want to thank everyone behind the scenes who's played a big part in making sure that these events occur. The transition from paper to digital will have many benefits. The first one that comes to mind is the health and safety of our people. Dealing with paper during a pandemic is a risk, it's a challenge that we definitely want to address. Secondly, making sure that we consume safe products is something that is foundational to our everyday lives. And finally, when we think about whether it's the value-added tax gap or whether it is the trade finance gap, we know that transitioning from paper to digital will help address and solve these, help entrepreneurs who are trying to support their families or local communities gain access to capital, or help governments who are struggling to collect the appropriate revenue to support their local communities do the same. So one of the crucial building blocks in accelerating cross-border paperless trade in food and agri is the digitization of SPS certificates. Paperless SPS systems offer enormous efficiency, effectiveness, and risk reduction benefits. It builds trust, reduces waste, and cuts on the time and costs associated with these processes. Inspirational both in food and agri and outside. So looking forward to learning from our panelists, looking forward to seeing the questions that our audience submits. And again, thank you so much for joining.
Good afternoon, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Asian Development Bank, I wish to welcome all of you to this webinar on accelerating cross-border paperless trade through the digitalization of sanitary and phytosanitary or SPS certificates. I especially welcome our colleagues from the International Chamber of Commerce, the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and the Standards and Trade Development Facility. After about 16 months into the pandemic, COVID-19 is far from over, and the economic outlook remains ambiguous. Lockdowns continue and still affect all spheres of human activity, including travel, education, business, work, and family life. Health systems continue to be tested despite the vaccine rollout. While trade flows are expected to recover this year, uncertainty still prevails. Digitalizing trade facilitation procedures is especially important for agricultural products, since many developing economies in the region depend on this sector to make trade and development more inclusive. Cross-border production networks in Asia and the Pacific are particularly strong in primary goods, including agriculture. In 2019, for instance, Asia's global value chain participation rate was about 87% of its gross exports in the primary sector, higher than all other sectors. And about 70% of this comes from trade within Asia. Making SPS electronic certificates would thus greatly benefit our economies. It would enhance trade and promote rural employment and the participation of small businesses. Through our sub-regional cooperation programs, ADB continues to support trade facilitation through, among others, enhancing digitalization, policy harmonization, and building capacity in customs systems. we are ensuring that our support goes toward acquiring the needed technology and streamlining policies and procedures while promoting interoperability of ICT systems. I look forward to today's discussions on how we can move forward to make SPS electronic certificates a reality. This is a topic that requires urgent action. I especially welcome the participation of our colleagues in the private sector who can provide insights from concrete real-world practice. Thank you very much, and I wish us all a successful webinar.
So thanks. I mean, after having listening to these opening remarks from the four co-organizers of this event, ESCAP, SCDF, ICC, and ADB, we will start with the first part of this session with this panel. But before, I would like to remind participants that there is simultaneous interpretation into English and Russian. And for that, you can see on your screen, at the bottom of your screen, you have one icon that is called interpretation. So you can choose from there to listen to the session in English or Russian. And also, I would also like to remind the participants that there is the chat function, and then you can open it on the right-hand side of your screen, and then you can include your questions, your comments on this. We have one question, one comment about the attendees. The attendees are here, are participated, and they don't have the possibility of taking the floor, opening the cameras and talk, but they can request that permission to the organizers, and that we will do for the third part of this session, which is the question and answer part. Now, I will start, as I said before, with the first part of this webinar. And for that, we will hear from the three standard SPS standard setting organizations. And for that, we have Craig Fetchuk from the IPPC, who is a senior advisor in the IPPC Secretariat and has been working on the e-FITO a long time ago. Then, and then we also hear from Gillian Milrea from the OIE, and for Hilde Cruz from the Codex Secretariat. So we would first hear from Craig, and he will tell us more about the e-FITO solution. Craig, you have the floor.
Thank you, Simone. If possible, I'd just like to share my screen really quick. I think I should be able to do that. Yes, and okay. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, especially good morning to our friends in Central and Latin America. Pretty impressed. Some of you were up pretty early, but thanks for joining. Yeah, the e-FITO solution has been pretty successful so far. And as you can see, we now have 101 countries connected to the hub. A number of those obviously are in a different state of development in terms of their access. Not all of them are exchanging, but at last count, we have roughly about 58 countries that are exchanging live as a matter of course, just as a matter of daily business. A number of those are actually exchanging paperless. Argentina, Chile, the United States, and Mexico, Sri Lanka have all been exchanging paperless with countries that wish to exchange in that way. And as you can see at the top of this page, we have a number of case studies that have been conducted. They're pretty detailed pieces of work from some of the countries that have been the leaders in coming on board. And these are available. You go to the webpage, which is www.efitoexchange.org, and you can get the information there to include, for example, as I go down the page, if you want to know more about the hub, you can click on the hub, and there's an overview. Again, one of the key things is that the use of the hub is voluntary. So there's no mandatory need to be using e-FITO, it's voluntary. But it is something that I think more and more countries, as you can see with 101 countries joining, it seems to be a popular thing. And for the hub, we have the guide to joining, what countries need to do, a step-by-step process for joining the hub. Now, to join the hub, you do need to have your own national system. Some countries have their own national system. Some countries do not have the resources to actually develop their own eFIDO system, their own national system. So in that case, we have the eFIDO Gens. This is a web-based access tool that's freely available. And there's also a guide to joining, including details, a little bit more detail in terms of what you need to do to join the gens. So we have that type of information, but we also have some live recorded training for the gens that's available on this website as well. A couple of key points that I'd like you all to remember is one of the reasons why we've been so successful so far is that the IPPC really only requires one specific certificate. We have the phytosanitary certificate, and coding this into hypertext markup language, or XML, was a challenge, but it was only one certificate that we had to encode, and we have a re-export certificate, which is essentially the equivalent thing. And one of the things is that makes it easier for us to do. Organizations in animal health and in food safety oftentimes have more certificates that they use to exchange, and this is somewhat problematic for them. Another thing that has made it fairly easy for us to have countries adapt and join is that we do not store or keep any data at all. We simply transfer the data from one national plant protection organization to another. And this takes less than 3 or 4 seconds total. We don't retain any data. We don't look at any data. The only thing we see is how many certificates are actually passing through the system itself. And at last count, the most recent total count was for the month of August, and we had 120,000 eFIDOs exchanged through all the countries that are on board the system. That's a pretty big number, but what's really important for you all to remember is that the system was built to exchange about 100,000 certificates per day. So what does that mean? That means that there's room for growth, not just for the other countries that are coming on board, but there is room for growth for other organizations, should they choose to do so, to come on board and maybe transform this from an eFIDO type of a system to an ESPS system or an e-certification system for trade. And this is something I like to stress because we only have limited funds to make things better. And my position and my perspective on all of this is I don't really think it's beneficial to reinvent the wheel when we already have something that works, that's efficient. Yes, it can be enhanced, and we are constantly enhancing things. And one of the recent enhancements that we've made, and we're very pleased, is that we have a connection through what we call a channel to the EU traces system. What this means is a country can actually join eFIDO rather than directly accessing traces, and can trade with the EU traces system, but it can also trade with the other countries that are on the eFIDO hub. And we're looking at experimenting this with developing channels to blockchain organizations. And in some cases, we've developed, or national systems have developed, direct access and connections with some of the customs organizations. And we're also working with organizations like Asakuda and others to see how we can integrate with national single window systems. And while Asakuta is a key component, we've also integrated with national single window systems in Nepal and Benin. And Nepal is the most recent country to actually send a certificate to another country live, and they just did their first certificate to Mexico on Monday. So with that, I think I probably have talked enough, and I'll be ready to answer some questions later on. But that's kind of an overview and an introduction to the IPPC ePhyto solution, and I'm really glad to be here, and I'm glad to see so many people on board and attending this really important workshop. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. It was very interesting to hear about, what is the ePhyto, what are the recent developments, and also the future possibilities for expansion of this ePhyto solution. So before giving the floor to the next speaker, I would like to just also remind participants that there is also a function of Q&A that is also an icon that you can find at the bottom of your screen, and where you can put your questions, and we will then address those questions one by one. So then I would like to give the floor to the next speaker, who is gonna tell us more about what the OIE is doing in the area of electronic SPS, electronic certification, sorry, and that's Gillian Mailry, who is the head of the standards department of the OIE, the World Animal Health Organization. Gillian, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Simone. You can hear me okay? I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to address you in the old-fashioned way. Thank you very much for the invitation, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening seems to be our standard welcome these days for these global events, but particular acknowledgement to the Asia-Pacific region for this work on this topic. Today, I'd like to take a bit of a broader view and provide you with a brief update of what the OIE has done so far with respect to certification, and specifically e-certification. I'm going to just quickly comment on three areas: the work in respect to OIE international standards, our partnerships with other international organizations, and specifically the recent work with an STF project looking at e-certification. So firstly, just to provide an update on relevant work in our OIE international standards, the development of OIE international standards is a key core mandate of the OIE, has been for many decades now, with the objective of improving animal health, veterinary public health, animal welfare, and to facilitate safe trade. So what have we got in the Aquatic Animal Health Code and the Terrestrial Animal Health Code with respect to certification and e-certification? So in fact, we have a chapter in both the Aquatic Code and the Terrestrial Code that addresses certification procedures. It describes the obligations and ethical responsibilities of importing and exporting countries in international trade, that the competent authorities, all veterinarians and certifying officials directly involved in international trade should be familiar with and indeed implement. The chapter in the Terrestrial Code was adopted back in 1986 and in the Aquatic Code in 1995. With respect to e-certification, which is perhaps just a specific aspect of the broader certification, back in 2015, the OIE members adopted a new article in this chapter, Article 5.2.4, to address electronic certification. And although this is quite a brief article, it did signal to our members the importance of electronic certification. I'll say a little bit more about the standards, the next steps in standard development a little bit later. I'd like to now move on to just describing a little bit about our partnerships with other international organizations. This is an area the OIE values in collaboration with sharing information, learning from each other. And we have over 70 cooperative agreements with relevant international organizations. Specific to this topic of electronic certification, I'd just like to indicate highlight a couple of organizations we have close collaboration with. The World Customs Organization. Back in 2015, we signed a cooperative agreement, which basically signaled active engagement between the WCO and the OIE. And this was around the time of the proposal for the World Trade Organization Trade Facilitation Agreement, as we wanted to contribute to the objectives of this agreement and explore, particularly with the WCO, how we could support our member countries in the development of single window. And of course, these discussions have also brought in Codex and IPPC around looking at efficiencies at the border for the SPS agencies, and also discussions around e-certification. We also have a very close working relationship with Codex. This was formalized in 2002 with the creation of the OIE Animal Production Food Safety Working Group, which is no longer in existence, but for sure we continue to have strong collaboration, and we participate actively in relevant committees, in particular the work of the CC Fix, which my friend Hilda will no doubt update you on shortly. Also, we work with IPPC on relevant topics, and the three sisters, OIE, Codex and IPPC, as observers to the SPS committee, also collaborate a lot in that forum and outside of that forum. The third important partnership is with the WTO STDF, to which Simone works. And the OIE was a founding member of the STDF. We're a member of the policy committee and the working group. And as was mentioned by Melvin, recently the STDF established an electronic certification advisory committee to which the OIE actively participates. And we consider this a very important forum for sharing information and strengthening collaboration, learning from each other, specifically around electronic certification. I imagine you're all aware of the STDF project on e-veterinary certification that was managed by the OIE from 2018 to 2020, entitled The Development of a Framework to Facilitate E-Veterinary Certification for International Trade on the basis of a single window system. This proposal was made to the STDF after electronic certification had been raised by some of the OIE members during the 2016 and 17 OIE General Sessions. For those that are not familiar with this report, which has now been published and is available on the OIE website and also on the STDF website, this project had two parts. The first part was to document country experiences in 5 participating developing countries, where we had experts undertake country visits with the objective of assisting these countries, developing countries, to increase their understanding and potential use of e-veterinary certification in order to better engage in international trade in animals and animal products. Also, through this information, we gained some understanding of the challenges and the barriers to implementation of e-certification in this group of 5 countries. The second part of the study project was to provide information, a desk review of other relevant international organizations and what they're doing in e-certification. And of course, the report included some recommendations for the consideration by the OIE. So I would encourage you, it's a very rich project report, and I'd encourage you to read it if you haven't already. So you're probably thinking, well, what are the next steps that the OIE is considering with respect to e-certification? And at this point in time, I can't give you concrete information because the senior management of the OIE are still in the process of considering our next steps, considering the recommendations in the STF report, considering that we've just launched our 7th strategic plan. We have a lot of other activities where this work will be prioritized amongst other streams of work. So hopefully in the coming months, we'll be able to be more specific about our next steps. And in closing, I'd also just like to note that electronic certification is only one piece of the framework for trade, and that OIE is also working to ensure that we address the topic of e-certification, but also in the wider trade system. And to this end, I'd just like to inform you, I'm sure many of you already know, that the OIE is also actively working to monitor the implementation of OIE standards through what we've called the Observatory Project, which commenced 4 years ago. And we also support members in the implementation of standards through the PVS pathway and other initiatives. So I thank you for the opportunity to provide this update, and back to you, Simone.
Thank you very much, Gillian, for this very interesting update. And also about, what the OIE is doing in the area of electronic veterinary certification, but also highlighting the importance of working together with other agencies, coordination, collaboration, for this collaborative effort, which is paperless trade. And I think this is the reason why we are discussing this issue now. And also the importance of looking at the wider picture. It is not only one certificate, but is about facilitating trade at all levels and in all the different areas. So with that, I know that Craig is already quite active in responding to some of the questions that we're getting in the chat, but please continue putting your questions there, and then we will have a discussion and the time to respond to some of these questions, because some of them are quite interesting, and I would think it is important to also share those responses with all the participants. Now I'd like to give the floor to the next speakers, who is Hilde Cruz from the Codex Alimentarius Secretariat, who will tell us more about what Codex is doing in the area of electronic food safety certification. Hilde, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Simon, and hello to everybody around the world. It's a pleasure being together with you now virtually. I wish we could have been together physically, but that's the situation nowadays. But hopefully soon we will be able to also hold the international meetings physically again. I'm delighted to share a little bit about the status of what the Codex Alimentarius Commission is doing in regarding to e-certification and paperless trade. Just to let you know that the Codex Alimentarius Commission is developing standards, guidelines, and codes of practice to protect consumers and ensure fair practices in food trade. In addition to the Commission and the Executive Committee, Codex has general subject committees addressing horizontal technical topics, commodity committees addressing quality aspects related to groups of food, and regional coordinating committees addressing regional issues, and task forcing addressing ad hoc issues such as the current task force on antimicrobial resistance. The General Subject Committee, Codex Committee on Food Import and Export Inspection and Certification Systems, the so-called CCFIX, is hosted by Australia. The 33rd session of CCFIX in 2017 had recommended that the committee undertake the development of guidance material for implementation of paperless electronic certification by amending and completing the existing guidelines for design, production, issuance, and use of generic official certificates. The new work was approved by the 40th session of the Commission in 2017. A working group chaired by the Netherlands was established under CCFIX to further the work. Following several rounds of discussion and commenting, including at CCFIX 24 in 2019, the guidance was presented to and discussed at CCFIX 25, which was held virtually only 3 months ago. It was highlighted that the COVID-19 pandemic had illustrated the importance of paperless use of electronic certificates and the urgency to complete the revision of the existing guidelines. Furthermore, this work is according to the Codex Strategic Plan 2020-2025, Goal 1, which states that Codex should address current, emerging, and critical issues in a timely manner. Following a thorough discussion at CCFIX 25, where it was also clarified that adoption of the revised guidelines did not did not oblige countries to move to paperless certification, CCPIX 25 agreed to forward the proposed draft guidance on paperless use of electronic certificates to CAC 44 for final adoption at the so-called step 5.8. This is, as I mentioned, a revision of the guidelines for design, production, issuance, and use of generic official certificates, and which amongst others contain a link and explanatory notes on the electronic version of the reference data model of the generic model official certificate, and an annex on paperless exchange of electronic certificates. It was last night confirmed that the 44th session of the Codex Alimentarius Commission, CAC 44, will be held virtually, following endorsement from the necessary 2/3 of the Codex members. So we actually just a few hours ago sent out information to the Codex family that the CAC 44 will take place virtually from 8th to 18th of November 2021. So we hope to see many of you there. And CAC 44 will be presented with a proposal to adopt the draft guidance on paperless use of electronic certificates, meaning the revised guidelines for design, production, issuance, and use of generic official certificates. So that's the current status in Codex Alimentarius Commission. And I would also like to underline that, like my friend Gillian from OAE also emphasized, that of course Codex has excellent collaboration with the other sister organizations, IPCC and OIE, and with WTO and SPS and SCDF and World Customs Organization. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Hilde, for this useful information as well about what Codex is doing in the area of e-cert, and about this guidance that will be discussed by the members and possibly endorsed by all members of the Codex Alimentarius Commission in November. So as you clearly mentioned, this is really a new step for Codex in terms of electronic certification, and the guidance will go really into details about SPS food safety e-CERT. So I would also look forward to what is the outcome of this discussion in November. So now, as I said before, I know that there have been already some questions, a few questions in this chat function. There are some of them, many of them have been already answered by Craig. So what I propose, and is also because of the time, is let's go ahead with the three next presentations from the case studies. And I think here the objective of those three presentations is really to hear from what is really happening, in terms of country experiences in the area of electronic plant health, animal health, and food safety certificates. And then we will have a question and answer session and a discussion with all the participants, and to be able to respond to all these questions. So for this second part of the panel, I would like to give the floor to Sang-Won Lim from the UN ESCAP, who will be moderating this session.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So good day, everyone. So I am privileged to moderate this session, and we have the privilege of having 3 country cases from Fiji, Malaysia, and also from Netherlands. So from Fiji, we have Mr. Nilesh Chand, who is a Chief Plant Protection Officer from Biosecurity Authority. Then we have from Malaysia, Dr. Sabaria Ismail, who is Deputy Director of Veterinary Biosecurity Management Department of Veterinary Services. Then last but not least, we also have Mr. Alexander Moret, who is the expert in the electronic certification, and he's currently consultant for the Netherlands Food and Consumer Product Safety Authority. So let's try to hear their experiences and approaches. So let me first invite Mr. Chand from Fiji to share his national experience. So Mr. Chand, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and greetings from Fiji. My name is Nilesh Chand, and I'm the Chief Plant Protection Officer for Biosecurity Authority of Fiji. And those of you who are wondering where Fiji is, it's a small country in the Pacific Ocean, close to Australia and New Zealand. Thank you, Pan, for bringing up the presentation. Fiji is very grateful to FAO IPPC and the organizers for receiving a chance to do a presentation in regards to the implementation of e-certification and e-FITO certification, particularly in Fiji. So on the screen, you can see our beautiful country. It's known as the paradise. Next. Okay, so how did the implementation of e-FITO start in Fiji? Biosecurity Authority of Fiji had a long-term vision to digitize its operations. And Biosecurity Authority of Fiji received the test version of the GENS program, and it began testing and fine-tuning the system to meet its business requirements. So with consistent communications between BEF and Department of Agriculture in Australia, particularly Dr. Peter Nemanis and UNICC, we were helped with the system to improve to suit our needs. And then with internal e-FITO working group, we were able to establish a group within the organization that was tasked to look at electronic certifications. So then Fiji began to pilot the exchange of e-certificates or e-FITO certificates with our neighboring country of Samoa, which was chosen as the pilot country in the Pacific, and together with New Zealand. And alongside that, we were addressing any issues and undertaking continuous improvements to the system. Furthermore, on the next slide, we were as a group within the organization and conducting a lot of awareness and training for e-FITO, particularly for our key staff in the organization and also in all the major divisions around Fiji. Fiji has 4 main divisions: the Central, Eastern, Western, and Northern. So a lot of economic activity is occurring around the Central and Eastern, Central and Western division, and that's where most of our efforts are concentrated. And the picture on the screen, you can see one of the awareness and training sessions in progress. And then there was a lot of awareness as well that was being conducted for the key exporters and the exporter groups together with the interested importers at the same time in order to get them interested to start using e-FITOs and to also start realizing the actual benefits that come with e-FITO certification. Next. Next screen. Okay, so that's where the e-FITO implementation setup took place, and then Fiji, as the National Plant Protection Organization responsible for issuance of phytosanitary certificates, started implementing the commercial consignments and generating all these e-certificates through the GENS system. And while we were generating and exchanging, which means the transmission and receiving of e-FITOs, it was currently only happening with New Zealand, and that was effective from 1st of July 2020, where paper certificates were simultaneously exchanged as a backup during this transition period, and that is to be phased out very soon. So as a backup to sending electronic FITOs, there was this simultaneous slow transition of phasing out the paper certificate. In the picture on the screen, that is the launching of the e-FITO in Fiji. And for all the other countries that Fiji was interacting with, we were continuing to use the paper certificates, and the e-FITO certificates were provided in the hard copies that were being exchanged. And now we can say that apart from New Zealand and some of the other countries, we are also sending certificates to Australia, USA, and other countries that have come on board. Next screen, please. So what were the main reasons for implementing a GENS system? As the previous speakers have very clearly said, that the GENS system to generate e-phytos was very cheap. Cheap in the sense that we were not using a lot of resources in the way of paper, ink, and other machinery in order to do that, and also cheaper in the sense that our exporters were not sending the physical electronic copies through courier. So every time there is a certificate sent through the courier, it costs the exporters at least 25 to 30 Fiji dollars. And now that with every shipment they were not doing that, they could easily use those saved resources in a more targeted way in the phytosanitary system. Also, the certificates, the e-phyto certificates were transmitted to the receiving NPPOs, the receiving countries, in a very fast manner. And during the testing stages, Fiji had done a case pilot study, and we found out that on average, the certificates were received on the other end in less than 5 minutes. And now that the improvements have come to the system, they are within seconds that the certificates are exchanged. So that's very fast. That's even before the consignment leaves Fiji, the certificates are on the other side with the receiving party. And when we say the certificates are very safe, they are not prone to any fraudulent activities, they will not be mutilated or changed in any way, and the exchange between the NPPO partners is in a very safe platform. So one of the main reasons was that the e-phyto system for Fiji proved to be very economical, it was very efficient, and there was a very quick turnaround of e-phyto implementation in the country. Together with that, the e-phyto certificate is globally harmonized, and the approach for electronic certification is also very user-friendly. Hence, BEF realized its overall benefits to use approach. And the more we use this e-phyto certificate or the e-certification system, we are seeing that the benefits are accumulating more and more towards our industries, and we see that our stakeholders and our customers are giving us a lot of praise in order for us to introduce to them this kind of system. And for that matter, Fiji is still developing a lot of modules for the system, and this will be slowly implemented as we go along. Next slide, please. So the challenges, Fiji being a developing country, we also had a few challenges. The GENS system of testing and fine-tuning to meet Fiji's phytosanitary certificate issuance requirements was a challenge in itself. And in consideration of Fiji's needs, the remoteness from other major trading partners, our maritime zones, and our capacities, this was quite a big challenge. And 2 years ago, when we started to get the things into order, the system was also being still developed. So it was a challenge, and there was a lot of testing and a lot of upgrades going on. Now the system has quite well stabilized, and the challenge is very less now. And also Fiji had a challenge to conduct the training for officers, for stakeholders, and consultations, as well as there were needs to do a lot of awareness in all major trading areas of the country, as Fiji is made up of many islands, and our organization Biosecurity has 22 regional officers to work with, and this required a lot of extensive planning. The cost of logistics were high, and there were so many other issues. Together with that, there was COVID-19, there were travel restrictions, there were social restrictions. However, we took all the challenges on board and we moved ahead with the system, and we are very glad to say that we have done quite well in this arena. Next slide, please. So what were the main costing areas for our implementation? There was the cost of time and commitment by that internal working group. that spearheaded the E-FITO work, and that included testing and piloting the system. There were costs involved with awareness and training workshops for staff and stakeholders. There was a lot of travel involved locally and for overseas workshops and trainings. There was an improvement to the IT infrastructure, the hardware and the internet connectivity, and there were costs involved with logistics of getting the system in place, running the system, and then also maintaining and sustaining the system. So these were some of the major costs that were involved. Next slide, please. Now, when we look at the benefits after incurring all those costs, one of the very important benefits that we have realized is beforehand information for pre-assessment of all imported goods, and this improved a lot of planning within the organization for the arrival and clearance of goods. Also, there was a lot of expedited clearance of commodities from the port of entries, including pre-clearance, where there was an opportunity to do so. And BEF used it to its advantage. Also, there were efficient replacement of any errors, or there were very little errors that came about in the certificates, and record keeping and easier searching and locating certificates, especially for past months and years, was just within click of button. Previously, if we had to go through loads of paper and files in order to get those done. Also, the access to certificates from any location within the network was very accessible, and we could do that very easily. The reduced cost in order to carry out this E-FITO certification system, and there was no longer a need to print many documents for the export consignments. Also, we noticed there were a lot of improved efficiencies by reducing data entry and data validation along the export pathway. And finally, they were very easier and systematic data storage, retrieval from the system, and also preparation of a lot of reports and a lot of variety of mix and match information for presentation to the management or third parties were made very easy. Next slide, please. So the lesson learned is that we should always have a backup for electronic or web-based system, and for GEMS, certificates can be manually processed when the system is down or offline, or when there is no power or internet outages. Also, one of the lessons learned is that the NPPO personnel should always be updated on the system, including enhancement, and ensure that it is tested and working properly. Countries should have adequate IT infrastructure and manpower capabilities with trained staff to implement, run, and maintain the process. Countries should identify and allocate resources, including funding, appropriately and with priority. Countries should be able to initiate implementation, and it requires a dedicated team with a lot of time and resources at hand. A lot of times, you might not succeed in the first instance, but you just have to be very persistent. And finally, you need to have a lot of awareness to all the related parties and the higher authorities as well before project implementation for their continued guidance and support. Next slide, please. So finally, in summing up, we could say that E-FITO employs a lot of security into the system. It brings about a lot of border process efficiencies, and E-FITO also has global coverage for the e-certification system. And we have learned that E-FITO can also be integrated with the e-vet system, with the codex system, and there is a lot of advantages for introducing this system and going ahead and getting the benefits and the future work that is going to be done. So thank you for your attention, and we welcome any questions now and into the chat box as well. Those are our website and email addresses, and the participants are welcome to send in emails and inquiries to get further details out of this. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Sang, for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chand, for sharing your national experience, which is very valuable to all the participants and all the speakers. So one lesson I recognize is that basically you paid a lot of attention to people. Indeed, what matters is people, and the people should have buy-in, and they should be properly trained for successful introduction and implementation of paper trade systems. So Fiji is actually paying attention to that aspect, and which is very good. So before I give the floor to Dr. Ismail, I would like to make a small announcements, because there was a question in the Q&A about the video recording of this session. So surely after this webinar, the video recording would be available on the webpage of this event, so you can watch it later in case you want to kind of catch up with some of the substance. But it would take a couple of days for us to kind of finalize and show it. So with this, I would like to invite Dr. Ismail from Malaysia to share her national experience. Dr. Ismail, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sawon Lim, our moderator. Okay, I'm Sabaria from Department of Veterinary Services. So my paper will be on e-veterinary health certificate, Malaysia experience. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, for information, in Malaysia, Ministry of Agriculture and Food Industry, Malaysia, for SPS matters as a coordinate the country's stand and policy with regards to SPS in consultation with other relevant ministries, departments and agencies. It was also involved with Department of Veterinary Services as a focal agency on animal health, responsible in issuing a veterinary health certificate. The veterinary health certificate for animal and animal product as provided under provision of Animal Act 1953, Section 16, and to comply to export requirements. And also under of ministry, there's a Department of Agriculture as a focal agency on plant health, responsible in issuing phytosanitary certificate for export of plant and plant products. Okay, so we have Malaysia Agriculture Quarantine and Inspection Services. It's responsible for as a focal agency in issuing export and import permit, responsible for quarantine, inspection and enforcement at entry point quarantine station as stipulated in Malaysia Quarantine and Inspection Services Act 2011. Right, then there's one agency under the Ministry of Health as a focal agency on food safety, responsible in issuing of health certificate for export of food. Next. Okay, for your information, DVS have been involved in electronic certification for application of import and export permit. So in year 2009, DVS has established this e-permit system for online application for import permit and export permit, and also veterinary health certificate. Okay, this online application to the system is compulsory for all import and export on live and animal products. For your information, this system is mainly for our importer and exporter, Malaysia importer and exporter apply for the import and export permit and also veterinary health cert. So we have been established for this system for our own local use, right? Then document will be printed and brought along during clearance of goods. Next slide. Okay, just want to briefly explain on the flow process of import in the system that we have been established in 2009. Of course, first of all, online application by importer. Then just now I did mention about Malaysian Agriculture Quarantine Inspection Services. They will verify and approve this application, and then payment by the importer and self-print permit. Okay, so during clearance of goods of entry point, importer to provide veterinary health certificate, halal certificate, and import permit. So markets also Malaysia Agriculture Quarantine Inspection Services conduct examine import documents and perform physical inspection and sampling when necessary at the entry point. Okay, so if the goods or the animals are required for quarantine, the animal will be to be kept in the quarantine before it allowed to be released. Or if this doesn't need a quarantine, so the goods will be released. Next. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the flow process for the export in the system of permit. Okay, so of course, online application by the exporter. And then because when export, there's a needed to issuing of veterinary health certs, so DVS will verify and approve the application. Marquis verify and approve application for the permit of export. Application acknowledged by custom and payment by the exporter. For the permit, self-printed by exporter. For the veterinary health cert, were printed by Department of Veterinary Services. Okay, next. Okay, this is the way forward to the electronic certification. Way forward for electronic certification. So for your information, in 2018, DVS has received a proposal from by MPI New Zealand application of e-certification system for the issuing of veterinary health cert. It was meant to facilitate trade between two countries by application of paperless documentation exchange. This system can provide faster documentation exchange and will help Marquis to plan the inspection schedule for the incoming goods. Okay, this is only the framework how shall be the electronic certification to be worked. All right, so there will be involvement of two agencies from the Malaysian side and also from the New Zealand side. Okay, you can see from the flow for the export. So DVS and the Marquis will look into the e-permit, and then national gateway. For the Malaysia, we have our DagangNet as our vendor to provide this service for the exchange of the information, to develop a platform of exchange of the certification, right, between Malaysia and New Zealand. Okay, so for the import, of course, there will be two agencies will be involved. So it's from the Malaysians will be Marquis, okay, for the import, and also the national gateway. Just now we mentioned our vendor who are taking care of this national gateway to develop this platform, and also together with New Zealand side from MPI. Next. Okay, DVS has exchanged DVS has engaged with DagangNet, our national service provider, to develop the data exchange platform. Okay, for your information, currently we are at level 1 in development of e-cert hub and e-cert exchange, where is a final requirement and list of animal health certificate exchange with New Zealand, and in a process of preparing general modules for future development for all types of e-certificate exchange with other countries. Okay, we are expecting for trial run on this platform and achieve first digital handshake between DVS and MPI New Zealand by end 2021, and data exchange will adopt the extensible markup language XML background and using the simple object access protocol. Full electronic data exchange activities with MPI is expected by April 2022. DVS also participating in ASEAN Single Window for Animal Health Certificate. And for information, recently DVS have received proposal by DAWI Australia regarding implementation of e-certification in our trade transaction. Okay, next. Okay, for your information, for my department, we only have two constraints. More on funding, whereby high cost for system development and insufficient ICT infrastructure. So that's all my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ismail. So yes, it was very interesting, the experience that you shared. Actually, you pointed that just, the cost is very high to implement this IT system. Yes, implementing IT system for paper trade, you have to invest a lot, not only human resources, but for installing systems, you have to invest on the ICT infrastructure, and also implementation is one thing. Then once you implemented it, you have to maintain it. So maintenance, it doesn't need quite significant amount of cost. So as Craig emphasized, utilizing hub can be a practical option, because some economies may have not big amount of transaction. If your transaction amount is small, utilizing hub can be very, very, very practical option that you can lean toward. So that's just my point. So with this, I think we can move to the next the presenter, and the next presenter is Mr. Moret from the Dutch authorities. So Mr. Moret, you would like to share the screen from your side, or do you want us to flip your screen and you just say next slide?
I will use the share screen option. So
okay, yes, please. So, Mr. Moret, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My name is Lex Moret. I'm from the Netherlands Food and Consumer Product Safety Authority. Welcome to all participants, friends and colleagues around the world. A special appreciation to the organizers for offering us the opportunity to create publicity on our work. And of course, very, very many thanks to the IPPC, the OIA, and the Codex for the continuous support that they deliver in the field of electronic certification. That has been very helpful to us. Today, I will focus on some case studies in the field of paperless certification in food safety. We in the Netherlands have an experience in the electronic certification on plant health, animal health as well. But from the invitation, we understood that today we have to focus on the food safety aspect, which is relatively new for us. Let me first introduce my organization. I'm representing the Netherlands Food and Consumer Product Safety Authority, and our mission is to protect our consumers and our nature. And our nature includes, of course, animals and plants. I'll do this only superficial. The Netherlands is a very small country. I will not focus too much on what we do, but it's very important to know that agricultural trade is extremely important to the Netherlands, because although we are a very small country, we have a massive agricultural trade. So border crossing procedures for agricultural commodities are extremely important to us. And for this reason, we already work for 20 years in the field of improving border crossing procedures, which of course include electronic certification as well. Our work was recognized. There has been several surveys including from the United Nations, and we are amongst the best performance on paperless trade. Paperless trade is really important to us, and this is because we are only with a few people. Let's say in our government, we are constantly under pressure to perform more with less people. Our trade is increasing, and meanwhile we get less people to inspect. So risk-based enforcement supported by electronic certification is really important for us to survive under these conditions. Let me first take you to one of the first and most important experiences that we had in the field of paperless certification of food. And that was the export of dairy to China. It was one of the first projects actually that we launched. We started this project in 2010 with the intention to work completely paperless on the export of dairy to China. And we have worked through all the steps which have been presented by the previous presenters. So we had similar experience like our colleagues from Fiji had at the implementation together with the Chinese. But in the end, in 2014, we were finally that far that we had the courage to go completely paperless in Shanghai as a pilot. And after that, this was successful. We continue to be paperless since 2015. So since 2015, at the export of dairy to China, we do not need any paper certificate anymore. Everything is completely dematerialized. And this is not only on the happy flow, but it's also on paperless replacements, for instance. So apart from establishing a workable connection in the sense that we can exchange information electronically in the day-to-day operations, we can also handle incidents electronically. At this moment, there is no human intervention anymore. There's no email, there's no phone anymore involved when an exporter in the Netherlands needs a replacement because of a small discrepancy in its certificate. So this is really, really automated and dematerialized to the most possible extent. The focus on the cooperation with China was more on operational procedures than on technology. I think technology was, of course, challenging in the beginning, but making the technology work and making the fit between technology and operational procedures was one of the most challenging part of the cooperation. Because procedures will need to change if you go paperless. That will be procedures for trade, but also procedures for inspection. For trade, for instance, we discovered that the SPS certificate, the food security certificate, was used by the industry as a collateral to effectuate a letter of credit. Now, if you take out the paper, this will affect trade procedures for the industry as well. So especially the aspect of moving from electronic certification next to paper certification into a situation where you only have the electronic certificate takes a lot of effort in procedures. And we were happy that we, together with the Chinese authorities, managed to set up a set of operational procedures which have been workable since 2015. And I can say proudly that at this moment there have been no major trade frustrations due to the paperless certification with China. Actually, all of us benefit from us. For industry, it's very beneficial that it's much faster, much cheaper, and for us and the Chinese authorities, the electronic exchange of information is much more reliable and opens opportunities like risk-based enforcement. Today, up to today, we have exchanged about 50,000 certificates paperless since 2015 at this moment. Another experience that we have is together with the United States. We started a similar project in 2012 and almost around the same moment in 2015. We went paperless, but only on the human health aspect with the USA. Let's say, and this is more specific on the export of meat products. We export a lot of meat to the United States, and at the export of meat, there are two different agencies involved in the United States. One is about animal health, that's APHIS, and there's another agency which is involved with consumer health, with human health, and that's FSIS. But together with FSIS, we are now paperless since 2015 already. Since we started this project a little bit later, we could already make use of standards that were not available when we started with China, but that were available at the time that we started with the USA. So let's say when it comes to standardization, I think the paperless export to the USA is more in line with the international standards now. And this is because we had at that time the opportunity to use that but it's not fully into the standard because it's about meat and meat export. And if you look into the arena today, the IPPC standardized most. I think the E-FITO solution is the most complete solution you can wish, because all the aspects of electronic certification have been addressed by the IPPC. On e-certification and animal health, I think first steps have been made. There's a lot of great work done and initiated already by the OIA. But when it comes to food, e-certification really have to start. It's great that the Codex has started some initiatives since 2017, but these have not matured yet. So with the United States, we, for instance, had to agree about a bilateral mapping. So where to put all the elements for the XML. But it works perfectly for us. It saves a lot of labor cost and paper costs. And today we already exchanged 4,000 certificates with on meat products with the USA without any problems. The last initiative that we have, which I like to present to you, is a project with Colombia that is for more recent date, actually. That is a capacity project which we run with INVIMA, the food safety authority in Colombia. This will be both on the import and the export of products, and this is on really food products. So you have to think about beer, bakery products, that kind of products. It's very new to us. And in this project, we have implemented the first draft standards that were created by the Codex. So it's for us a learning project, both for us and Colombia. This is a learning project because we would like to complete this project perfectly in line with the standards provided by the Codex. We hope that this project, the results of the project can be launched soon, and I hope this year, maybe by the beginning of this year, and then we have the intention to work paperless on bakery products, that kind of products, together with Colombia, in the trade between Colombia and the Netherlands. So these were my experience so far. Just a small impression of the Netherlands. For those who are interested, you can read it back in my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Morat. Dutch is always innovative and proactive in adopting new technologies and the new way of doing business, and really pioneer in implementing paper trade. So we have a lot of lessons to learn from the Netherlands. So we look forward to more experience from your experience. So with this, I think we had a chance to listen from 3 country cases. And now I think we can have 10 to 15 minute Q&A, and to facilitate the Q&A session. So I would like to give the floor back to Simon. So back to you, Simon, please.
Thank you very much, Sangwon. And yeah, as you said, we don't have a lot of time, but I think I would also like to thank all the participants and all the speakers who have been already responding and asking the question and responding to them, because there is already in the Q&A box, you can see already 33 questions that have been answered, and there are already a few that are here, but I see all the speakers have been very active responding to those questions. So since we don't have a lot of time to address all these questions live, I know that, I mean, there have been some more general questions that I think could be addressed by all the speakers. And one of them that I took note is the one on more harmonization that could be needed from the 3 standard setting organizations, SPS standard setting bodies. So more harmonization about in relation to animal health, plant health, and food safety certificates. I don't know who from the 3 sisters would like to have an answer to that question. Is it more harmonization? Is it needed more harmonization on SPS certification? Craig, I think you would like to say something.
Well, sure. Yeah. Having worked, I used to work for FSIS many years ago, and we're not going to be able to harmonize our certificates to be equal the same way. That's an impossibility. But I think in the area of animal health, they've put together a standard sort of format for an animal health certificate, and I think that goes a long way. I think Codex is working on this, and I think that's even a bigger challenge than in the animal health. But where I think we can really have an effect, and this is something I put in the Q&A part, is my hope or dream is that rather than having OIE go off and build a system and Codex go off and build a system, that we can collaborate and you know, IPPC, yeah, we have eFIDO. We built it quick because we only have one cert. But if we can work together, it can be an ESPS system, and that's something that I think is really important also, you know, where STDF can come in too and sort of help facilitate that happening as well, because I hate to see money, you know, being spent needlessly when there's a system that kind of exists. I think Lex referred to it very well, and I think we can collaborate in that sense. And I wish we could talk a little bit more about that as the three sisters. And I'd ask STDF to help facilitate those types of conversations as well, because you bring everybody together. So my thought is collaborate to build a bigger system, but in terms of harmonized certification, I think we're so different and diffuse, it might be a bigger challenge.
Thanks, Greg. I think Gillian would like to say something.
Thanks, Simone. You're just building on what Craig said. I mean, also just to remember the OIE, Codex, IPPC, we're international intergovernmental organizations. For us, we have 182 member countries, very diverse in terms of, you know, their situations with respect to financial, developing, what they're trading. It's complex, and I think we are limited in what we can harmonize, and let alone the complexity, because we are different organizations, different governance, different drivers of our members. And I think, you know, hopefully we've provided the message that as far as we can, we are all collectively working very hard to harmonize where possible. And just to, again, go back to the broader, to have an electronic certification system, you still need a certificate. And we definitely have got harmonization around. We've got model certificates in both of our codes. We've also addressed the relationship between the food safety aspects of certification when you're talking about food safety aspects of animal and animal products. So that is addressed in model certificates. So I think I kind of encourage us to keep broadening and looking at the whole system and not narrowing down. And I think there is a strong commitment from the three international organizations to do what we can, but we've also seen in the presentations from countries the importance of the progress made through bilateral cooperation. And I think that's where the motivation is. These are expensive systems. We've seen that also noted. It requires, you know, ongoing training, funding. So I think often the motivation comes from where there's two countries with an interest and a motivation to facilitate and develop these systems. Not, you know, while we don't forget what Craig's highlighting to, you know, we don't want to all, we want to not keep reinventing the wheel in 182 countries, but, you know, use common systems, learn from each other. So yeah, I think we are doing a lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. And Hilde, you also like to say something.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I just wanted to echo my colleagues, and yes, indeed, we aim to learn from each other, and we do collaborate, and we exchange information and experiences, and as was stated by both my colleagues, they're different organizations, different tasks, different characteristics, different areas of work, but we aim to work together as much as possible, and to ensure efficiency and as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilde, and thank you all the three of you for these responses. Now, another question that I think is also a bit cross-cutting among what has been discussed is that, I mean, we have heard some very specific examples, in particular from Malaysia and from the Netherlands, about bilateral discussions and bilateral exchanges of electronic certification, particularly for animal health and also food safety certificates. There was one question about on that in the questions and answer box. Do countries, and I think maybe one of the three country speakers can tell us more. Do you think countries will need more guidance and more and additional guidance, additional standards from the OIE, from Codex on this, on exchange of electronic certificates, in addition to what you have already? I don't know who from the three countries would like to answer to this question. So, and I'm asking for yeah. So, Dr. Ismail, you want to respond to this question? Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Okay. For Malaysia, actually we are open and welcome for any suggestion and guideline to improve in development of e-certification application. So I believe that Malaysia, we are welcome if any suggestion we can look into it, and whether we can consider on the standard or guideline of it. But as you know that for us, when we do exchange of the e-cert between country, definitely we have communication between country on the whatever compliance that we need to comply according to the health cert content. Okay, so during the negotiation, we can discuss on it. So for Malaysia, we are welcome any guideline or standard need to be discussed with us. Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have Fiji, Dr. Chand, who would like to take the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. In regards to the bilaterals, actually, the system in Fiji is on a very pilot mode. So, in that regards, Fiji is also assisting the Pacific Island nations as a pilot country in trying to get things across to the e-FICO implementation. And on the bilateral mode, we are also working with our trading partners. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we don't have a lot of time, so I would like to now thank you all, the participants, all the speakers for all these questions, for the answers. I know that many of those have already been answered. Many of those were linked to the general costs, the time frame, the requirements needed to use a FITO solution, the sustainability of the system, and all of those have been addressed by Craig in the chat. I think also an opportunity that this type of workshop is bringing is that connecting all this the speakers with the participants. So I don't think it would be a mistake to say that all the speakers will be ready to respond to any additional questions and to be contacted if any of the participants, if any of the countries have specific questions and for them. So I know that there is one question that would like to be responded by, someone would like to respond it now in the closing remarks, but I think now that it's almost 11:30, I would like to give the floor to Sangwon for the closing remarks of this webinar.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So yes, so before I make a closing remarks, so I recognize that Mr. Chand raised his hand. So Mr. Chand, would you like to briefly intervene before I close?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so in that regards to the bilaterals, what I was explaining is Fiji has its bilaterals with our trading partners, and we are able to do that for e-FICO exchange. And in regards to exchange with other Pacific Island countries, Fiji is doing pilot studies with Cook Islands, with Marshall Islands, with all the other smaller countries. And we are also trying to train their staff and train their personnel to bring up their capacity. And we share our experiences so that they also can start implementing e-FITOs from our region in the Pacific to the wider global community. And I'd like to, at this point, thank the organizers and the participants for this evening's program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chand, for your interventions. So now I would like to move toward the closing sessions. So I would like to kind of emphasize that, as Mr. Jan Duval highlighted in his opening remarks, there is one good policy tool available for Asia Pacific country called the Framework Agreement on Facilitation of the Cross-Border Paper Trade in Asia and the Pacific. In implementing paper trade, sometimes you are talking about the technical tools and standard, but that is not enough. You should secure political commitment to make your paper trade sustainable. And for Asia Pacific countries, they have this intergovernmental UN treaty that can secure political commitment so that you can implement and sustain your paperless trade systems. So, and this paperless trade treaty, its parties will start implementing the treaty from April 2022. So we hope that the parties of the agreement can also start facilitating ESCAP implementation among the parties. So with this, I would like to play a short video introducing the this framework agreement. And Pan, please. Thank you, Pan. So at the same time, I would like to recommend today's country presentation to be populated in the ESCAP developed cross-border paperless trade database, which URL is digitalizedtrade.org. So basically in this database, we try to collect the cross-border paperless data exchange cases in the world so that the lessons learned from implementation can be more effectively shared. So my colleague Armen, who are behind the curtain for this webinar, but he is here and he'll approach those three countries that presented today and recommend you to kindly consider populating your lessons learned in this cross-border paperless trade database. So on behalf of the 4 co-organizers, I would like to express my gratitude to the speakers and panelists for sharing their perspectives as well as the experience. And I would like to thank all the participants for their fruitful interventions to make this webinar a success. And I would like to remind the participants to kindly spend a bit of time to complete a survey to help co-organizers to improve our future webinar series. So that would be much appreciated. And not least, but I would like to inform about our next webinar, which will be held on 6th of October. And the topic would be the launch of the Asia Pacific Trade Facilitation Report 2021. supply chain resilience and trade facilitation amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So 5 UN regional commissions are conducting the survey on the digital and sustainable trade facilitation, and it was completed, and we are launching findings for the Asia Pacific in this occasion, and you will have a chance to learn about where you stand in trade facilitation performance, and what are the gaps, and the way that you can try to improve your performance. So please mark your calendar, and actually you can register yourself already in this upcoming webinar. So I recommend you to just visit the web pages and register in advance. With this, so I conclude the webinar and hope to meet you again in the next webinar that I mentioned. So thank you and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, and bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.